Now we're good to go. Okay. So tonight we're going to hear from Arthur Johnson, Heidi Stevens, Rufus Burnett, and Vaughn Gordon. So I will introduce them in the order that they'll be speaking, which is the order I just mentioned them in, and then they will have a series of prompts that they will answer. So to begin, one second. So to begin, we have Arthur Johnson. I'm going to highlight them as they speak so you know who they are. We have Arthur Johnson. Arthur was born in the nation's capital, but his roots are in New Orleans and date back to visits with his grandmother who lived in the lower 9th Ward on Fostel Street. He grew up in Washington, D.C. and earned undergraduate and graduate degrees from the George Washington University and the University of the District of Columbia, respectively. He relocated to New Orleans in 1999, where he has established himself as an accomplished fundraising professional and nonprofit leader with a number of educational institutions and nonprofit organizations. This has included work with Tulane and Xavier universities and the New Orleans Public Schools. More recently, he has served as Regional Vice President for Major Gifts and American Heart Association, Director for the Office of Development for Episcopal Community Services of Louisiana, and Chief Development Officer for Operation Reach. As the Center for Sustainable Economic Development's Chief Executive Officer, he is responsible for the day-to-day operations of the organization and works closely with the staff and volunteers to advance CSED's key initiatives focused on food security, the natural environment, and the built environment. Also, he has served on the board of New Harmony High School, a state charter school focused on environmental and resilience, providing opportunities to explore and develop young minds and leaders for the future. Last December, Arthur was selected as the winner of the 2019 Paul and Joyce Eicher Leadership and Democracy Award. The CSED winning team was selected from 64 nominations in this national contest for combining citizen engagement with environmental science to create equitable development and policy on climate resilience. Following Arthur, we will have Ms. Heidi Stevens, who was highlighted. Heidi Stevens grew up in Daytona Beach, Florida. She graduated from Berry College in Rome, Georgia, and taught in rural North Georgia public schools, completing her master's degree in early childhood development from Burnett University in Gainesville, Georgia. Returning to Florida, she taught early elementary education in Chapter 1 high-need public schools for over 30 years. Since 1996, Heidi has served as the director of Camp Friendship, a residential summer program for low-income children in Aberdeen, Mississippi. He holds a master's degree in pastoral theology from Loyola University in New Orleans and serves as liaison to Fordham University's global outreach and community engaged learning students. Heidi is a devoted practitioner of centering prayer. Her adult son is a critical care nurse, and her grandson Jonathan has helped at Camp Friendship for 5 years. Following Heidi, we'll have Mr. Rufus Burnett. Rufus Burnett Jr., PhD, is an assistant professor of systematic theology at Fordham University in the Bronx, New York, and is the author of Decolonizing Revelation, a spatial reading of the blues. His research engages cultural production as a resource for constructive theological reflection on the legacy of colonialism and enslavement in the modern/colonial world. And to conclude our panel, we will hear from Mr. Vaughn Gordon, who is now highlighted. Vaughn Gordon is passionate about equipping youth to build stronger communities through education, empowerment, and dialogue. He is the Youth Engagement Manager for the William Winter Institute for Racial Reconciliation in Jackson, Mississippi, which aims to create spaces for interracial, multicultural dialogue and promote equity and inclusion for all communities. He has also worked in restaurant operations and business development. Vaughn has served on the boards of the Mississippi Statewide After School Network, the Refill Jackson Initiative, Cure Sickle Cell Foundation, and Operation Shoestring. He attended the University of Mississippi. He is also a proud husband, father of 3 amazing girls, and caretaker to a Dachshund Feist mix named Ginger Snap. So, that said, now we're going to start our dialogue. So the first question, and we're going to answer in the order that they spoke in, so Arthur, Heidi, Rufus, and Vaughn. How does the work you do embody racial justice?
Okay, now I think we're maybe better. Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Vanessa, for that introduction. Well, you know, our organization, the Center for Sustainable Engagement and Development here in New Orleans, was a community-based organization that was created after Hurricane Katrina. And the intent of the organization as founders was designed to help a community who had been destroyed from the hurricane. And there was so much discussion about any type of recovery. And this community is made up of a number of seniors and elders, homeowners, but people of color. And so as an organization, though, our focus has been on sort of recovery, resilience around a sustainable umbrella, and focused about natural environment, built environment, and economic development, and health and nutrition. We find that all of this links together as we talk about quality of life issues, equity, inclusion, voice for all, how we connect these things together, and that they're not separate at all. They are really part of the whole makeup of who we are as a community, as a people, and as an organization. So we've really realized as we did more of our principal work that you can't separate, it is your environment, you can't separate that, and you have to bring these linkages together, and you have to make sure that they are connected, and that people understand that, because as they're making decisions, many of the times in our world, we're dealing with issues that we like to separate. You know, it's either A or B or one or two, and that's not the case. It's truly the full aspect of everything that we do, and it impacts how we do things, the decisions that we make. Those who are impacted, we you know, the least impacted becomes the most impacted. So us as an organization, we realize that racial equity and community change are all part of our thread. It's what makes us who we are as an organization and how we do business. And this changes as time moves on. So it's been 15 years since Hurricane Katrina, and a lot has changed, though a lot hasn't changed. So it's really important as we look at our focus that we keep that in mind of how we're dealing with the different challenges, whether it's a hurricane, pandemic, dealing with health, economic development, where people are jobless, looking for maybe how they make decisions about their needs or their quality of life, including food and housing, medicine. They all link together, and they're not separate entities. So this is how we see us as an organization, how we play a role, and how it impacts our mission. And that mission even becomes even stronger as we continue to move forward in dealing with the complications that are in this world and the challenges that are brought forth. And as a community-based organization, we bring about a certain level of quality and consistency, sometimes in a very inconsistent and ill-mannered world in these decisions, as we've seen. Politically, it also plays a role in how we do that. And we, though we're not a faith-based organization, we do believe that your faith, or whatever you believe in and how that works, is so important, because you have to believe in something. And you have to have something that becomes a driving force to move forward. So this is how we see our organization impacting and playing a role in this racial equity and racial justice issues as they come about.
Thank you, Arthur. Now we will turn over to Ms. Heidi Stevens.
Thank you. I wanted to thank Fordham and many others for the work that they do with us at Camp Friendship. And what I see it embodying with the racial and social justice is in a very practical local level. We're able to have groups of children come in and kind of live the values that are central to the gospel. Our staff is all volunteer. None of us get paid. And that creates a whole different atmosphere of giving with the children and people that are at camp. And we also have an enormous source of goodwill and talent and local people that are very, very supportive of the camp. Now, justice work historically is about bringing different racial groups together. And one of our counselors observed that camp, as we've come to know it, is a purposeful exposure and framing of friendship as alternative to views that the children and counselors may be getting in other areas or in their homes. So we bring these children together for the 4 weeks of June. And the camp was originally begun in 1968, which was 14 years after Brown versus the Board of Education. It was a time in Mississippi when integration of Black children and white children was just becoming kind of a new way of thinking, a new way of going to school, a new way of being with people. But when we bring them to the camp, it's kind of an equal playing field. And I think any of the counselors that are tuned in or anyone that's been to the camp can easily say everybody gets the same bunk, they eat the same food, they ride the same bus to the waterway with Mr. Rob. And it's just a real equalizer. And I think in my own experience, I've seen children and some of the counselors and students that have come that have found they've been able to find Christ or that spirit of caring and giving in themselves as they share it with others and serve others. We're also including now a lot of Hispanic children in the area, parents that work in the sweet potato farms and in the furniture plants. So we've kind of incorporated the Black-white relationship and expanded that to the Hispanic children as well. We're not trying to convert anyone to Catholicism, and we make that very clear as camp goes on. And the Glen Mary Home Missioners saw it more as a ministry of presence, a ministry of being there for the people and there for the children and their families, and creating what Dr. King often spoke of as the beloved community. Although some days it may not seem quite as beloved and peaceful, you know, the bottom line is these children are cared for. They have an opportunity to be equal to others and to experience the love of the people that are there serving them. And I think if they take that week with them in some small way, that they've been able to experience that. And we've also, for the first time this fall, had the incredible privilege of working with Fordham through their community engaged learning classes. And the one we're working with now here in Mississippi is with Professor Tim Woods. And it's called, I want to make sure I get it right, Strategic Communication. And it has been eye-opening in many ways, working with graduate students. And what we decided to do was to create, looking at racial and social justice concerns and bringing them into this area of Mississippi, 5 different areas that we felt had the greatest need for this talent that the students were bringing to us. The first is Catholic Charities. It was formed in Fordham, Mississippi several years ago, specifically in Calhoun County because of the need. It's the poorest county in the state. If it's any indication, it's the only county in the state with no 4-lane roads, and many of the roads they have are not in the best of the shape. It's very rural, very, very poor county. And through Catholic Charities, we're serving the poor in the area, including the immigrants, the Black families, the white families. We're able to offer services that these people need. And if we can't do it directly, we're able to put them in touch with people that can. The other area, the second area, is the tutoring program that we started through Catholic Charities. We got some amazing grants from the Sisters of Notre Dame and from Bancorp South Bank and some other educational grants. And we have begun a tutoring program. We've hired 3 wonderful teachers, 4 days a week, focusing on early child development. And I think I heard Rufus say, it's education, education, education. I know, Dr. Arsimino Hossman spoke down here one time from Boston College, and his whole point was education is what levels the playing field and what gives these children opportunities. So we're working with the Hispanic children, African-American Black children, and some of the poorer white children in the area, focusing on early childhood language development and early reading skills. So that's moving along with the group. Camp Friendship, and then the other 2 groups, St. Christopher's, church, both the Hispanic and Anglo group. And what the focus of the Fordham CEL class is communication strategies. And I'll wrap it up by saying they're bringing us into the 21st century in this little part of Mississippi, working with websites and just ways that we would have never been able to have afforded or contracted people to come in to do. So we're very grateful for that. And we're very grateful for the communities that we have been able to create to embody the social and racial justice.
Thank you, Heidi. Now we will turn over to Rufus.
Yes, thank you so much, Vanessa, and to the Global Outreach Program and the Community Center, the Center for Community Engaged Learning for all of the work that you all are doing for us at Fordham. And thank you for the introduction and all these wonderful gifts that Arthur and Heidi have offered us so far. I am a professor in the theology department at Fordham. And my connection to this conversation and the program is that I plan to teach a course entitled The Spirituals and the Blues in African American Christianity in conjunction with the Global Outreach Program. And the course itself is what I want to focus on right now in my conversation with you all, is an attempt to try to bring students into what the spirituals and the blues chronicle. That is, what do they tell us about? What kind of people are they being, what kind of people sing the blues? What kind of people sing the spirituals? And what is on their mind when they're doing that singing? How do these musics function, right? They're not just music for music's sake, as many of the ethnomusicologists and theologians that have interpreted the blues would say that they have functionality. They're supposed to function, right? And the bet that I'm making with this course, the risk that I'm taking with this course, is that a semester-long engagement with these art forms is a form of engaging the sacred. And so this course is taught in line with a part of the Fordham core in theology, and it is a sacred text course. And so I think that this course meets the objective of treating issues of race and equity, primarily because I think, and I'm back to the wager that I was about to make, is that in order for us to move past some of these, or move into and take head on some of these racial issues that have divided our country, we have to accept that that what keeps us from meeting that standard is we don't want a level of intimacy with one another. And this course is designed for students to reach a level of scholarly and intellectual intimacy with the history and what I would argue is the religious consciousness that infuses the spirituals and the blues. These are the songs of a people that is trying to wrestle with what it means to be divorced from the land that they knew God in to a land that they would have to find God in. And that, to me, is the first layer of intimacy, is sitting with the archive, sitting with thinkers who have tried to engage the religious consciousness of Black Americans. And that, to me, is a theological task that oftentimes gets overlooked in the ways that these art forms are interpreted. And so the next piece of it, along the lines of intimacy, is the work that I feel like we are doing with the Center for Community Engaged Learning, and that is to think about anti-racism, particularly on one of the themes of the values. And I'm skipping over some of them, but particularly decolonization, right? And so those two values are another thing that I try to think through, help students think through in the course on the spirituals and the blues, that the blues is a type of epistemic or a knowledge base. And so are the spirituals. They're a knowledge base. They're a way of thinking about the Bible. They interpret the Bible, given the enslaved that are singing these spirituals are interpreting the Bible, given the context that they find themselves in. And they're trying to bring meaning to that context of racial domination through, if you're thinking about the spirituals, through reflections and improvisations of the biblical text to meet their current situation. One scholar by the name of Theophilus Smith says that the Bible in the hands of the enslaved is a kind of a grammar book. And the blues is, as Albert Murray would say, the counterstatement to that. And in seeing these conversations between the spirituals and the blues, I think we get to a level of intimacy, and hopefully we'll get to a physical level of intimacy after the pandemic lifts, and we will be doing some tours in Mississippi and creating some new partners in addition to the three that are on today. Some partners in trying to get students closer to this legacy, which is not just about the music, but also with how people imagine a new type of political economy, thinking about people like Fannie Lou Hamer, that is a kind of a blues economy that she's trying to envision. There's some spirituals in that too, but very much so also, as Clyde Woods would say, there's a blues episteme or a blues way of thinking that is definitely alive and well with people like Fannie Lou Hamer. So I'll stop there.
Perfect. Thank you, Rufus. Von Gordon, I'll turn it over to you now.
Ooh. Vanessa, you did not tell me what you were getting me into. My goodness. I will say to the good Professor Burnett, I was having a conversation with my sister-in-law just the other day. She has heard a version of a song by a blues artist named Marvin Cease. Now, this is not a spiritual. Named Marvin Cease, kind of Southern soul, and the Canton Spirituals, which here in Mississippi, they are a legendary blues group. They both have songs called Clean Up What I Messed Up. She was singing one and I was thinking the other, and they are not singing about the same things, but they sound just alike. This is just I'm so honored to be with you all tonight. I was honored when I just knew of the work that the people, my co-panelists, are doing and the work that you all are doing. I am beside myself. My heart's beating out of my chest now because I know more about the depths of your work. Thank you for doing what you do. I am the Youth Engagement Manager for the William Winter Institute for Racial Reconciliation. We were created, Institute was started about 21 years ago now on the campus of the University of Mississippi, which is, for those of you who are students of history, was once called the last bastion of segregation in the South through the integration of James Meredith and others. It is a university rich in tragedy, but also rich in culture. So we take pride in being born there. The term reconciliation in our name, I think in a space of the faith community, even in academic space, you can appreciate that. In many of the spaces that we work in where people are talking about racial justice and equity, reconciliation is not always a welcome term. So we stand on what might be a paradox to some people. Our work is broken up really into three areas. We have our community building work, which is, it is designed to kind of create and hold a model for how people in community can engage with each other. One of the terms that the axioms we like to use is that through our work, we want to build bridges of trust and relationships strong enough to bear the weight of the truth that must be told. And we prefer to work with people who actually live in geographic proximity to each other, even if they don't call it their community. Our goal is to help them build relationships in such a way that they become a community. They identify their shared values. They identify shared goals and things that are mutually beneficial, and that they make a pact, they make a commitment to pursue those things. What we hope we bring is a process that allows them to do that. I'll share a little bit in a little while about that process and what it looks like. The second area of our work is policy and civic engagement. You cannot dismantle systems of oppression, and you cannot achieve equity without some serious analysis and change of policy. And our civic engagement is all about how people engage in that process of analysis, of learning, of acting, organizing, mobilizing, all of that. And as a part of that work for us, we like to create spaces in the same way that I described our community spaces. We want to create spaces where the people making policy and administering policy deepen their understanding or the dimensions that they understand the people affected by that policy through. We hope to create an equity lens for the policymakers in Mississippi. That is a goal for us. We want them to make legislation where they have anticipated how it might impact different identity groups. We want them to think intentionally about that before they pass bills, before they even debate them or they show up in committee. So that to us is one of the ways that you most efficiently impact systems change. And the last area of our work is the one that I get to spend most of my time in, and that is the youth engagement work. For me, youth engagement work around our mission, which is to end all discrimination based on difference. It really is about three things. It's creating spaces for young people. Mississippi is still a relatively, and the other Mississippians on the panel may have different words to use here, but we're still a pretty segregated state. We are segregated certainly in our faith spaces. We are segregated in our schools very largely, and we have really high degrees of residential segregation. So our primary audience for creating where we bring young people together, they're high school students. And it's not out of the realm of possibility that 50% of the students who engage with our programming, our in-space programming, don't go to school with kids who don't share the same race as them. And so we want to create spaces. We work to do it not just in the summer where our flagship summer program is, but also throughout the year. We want to create spaces for young people to experience diversity, to experience inclusion, but to also experience belonging with the same group of people. And so that is a core mission of ours. So we want to create those spaces. We also want to make space for young people. There are organizations all over the state that are doing amazing work for the benefit of young people. And there are some that are doing great work really without considering young people. And so we want to kind of sound the alarm that there needs to be young people, not token young people or tokenized young people, but fully participating youth in all of the spaces where the decisions are being made that will shape their lives. So we challenge community organizations, we challenge governmental organizations to include some student representation, whether that's a school board or a city council. Are there youth in that space informing the decisions that you are making? And the last thing that we want to do is advocate for young people, just to remind folks always that what we are doing here will be inherited by a generation, and it's incumbent upon us to make sure that we leave them something worthwhile. That may seem intuitive, but we often find that it is not. Sometimes because adults are, people are fighting to their last breath over things, and they don't really have time to think beyond the immediate win. So that is our work, the work of the Winter Institute in a nutshell. One of the ways that we go about it, or several of the ways that we go about it, is we center dialogue and storytelling. We believe, as it's the quote goes, it is hard to hate a person whose stories you know. And we know that a pathway to kind of better understanding the lives of others is hearing their stories, getting to engage with them beyond the one dimension that we most easily see, right there, their race or their gender. Maybe we even know where they're from, and we make all sorts of assumptions based on those things. We have biases, of course, explicit, but also implicit, that impact how we treat people, how we see them. And when we are in positions of power or authority and have an ability to impact those people's lives, sometimes we do it in oppressive ways. And changing that, we believe, begins with a deeper understanding of the humanity of those people. That is, and to us, all of that is about justice and the dismantling of oppressive systems. And we believe that race, if understood as a system of oppression, is a pathway to understanding with relative ease sometimes almost every other form of identity oppression. And so we take great pride in being an organization that works primarily in race. Um, I, when Brother Johnson said earlier about their work in New Orleans, a lot has changed, yet a lot has not changed. That is, for us, one of the saddest aspects of our history here in Mississippi. The systems of oppression and disenfranchisement, divestment, all of that, they just kind of seem to be spinning on an axis. And we believe that that must be interrupted, and it has to be interrupted at the most basic human level. If you imagined a fire in the middle of a field and it's cold, people, the most people will get warm, not treating the fire like it is the presenter in a lecture hall, but getting in a circle around the fire. So we believe that that is the way real community gets built and sustained. That's important to us. Circles have a way of self-governing, which is really important. They have a way of kind of self-correcting. And finally, in circles, responsibility should be shared. We encourage that as a fundamental building block of community building. And we believe that that community building leads to a deeper understanding and critical engagement with equity. When you value everyone in the circle, because you have a deeper understanding of who they are and what value they bring, it makes it a whole lot easier to focus on equity. Otherwise, we are in that space where people imagine that the pie is really, really small, and anything, quote unquote, they get, we lose. And so we think it's important to interrupt that. So that is our work. Again, I'm really honored to be with you all. If I may, my fellow panelists have agreed to participate in one of the many exercises that we try to do to make our work real. And I want us to do this in part because I want you, from the spaces that you are in, the spheres of influence that you have, as we participate in this, I want you to think about what it might look like in the spaces that you occupy, whether that is a civic or social organization. It might even be your Thanksgiving in 2022. I wouldn't advise it in 2020 or 2021, but anyway. So there are a couple of things, if you don't mind, Vanessa, would you put up on the screen the one document I have? So I've talked about these circles. I've talked about the sharing of stories. To the professor's point, stories are really, really intimate parts of it's real intimacy. When people share their stories with you, they are giving you a part of themselves that they really can't take back. And so we try to honor stories, and we try to honor dialogue. On the screen are our 9 guideposts. We call them our welcome table guideposts. When we enter a community or enter a space, this is what we enter with. Literally, it'll be on the front of our shirts in some spaces going forward. But there are 9 norms, if you will, that we think one of them by themselves, when taken seriously in dialogue or in relationship, has the potential to impact it in really positive ways. But if taken all together for a group of people in a community, they become transformative. So every time we're in a space with people, we ask them to, one, be present and welcoming. And that means to set aside, as the guidepost says, set aside the things not done, all the things that may be distracting you in that moment. But also to welcome others and presume that you're welcome. We've all gone into spaces where we weren't so confident that we were in that space. We were welcomed in that space. So I ask you for the next few minutes to imagine being welcoming and being welcomed. Listen deeply to learn. Underneath the tone of voice, the choice of words, there is real human feeling, and there's something for us to hear there. But you don't get it if you're not listening deeply. The third is no fixing. So for what we're going to do tonight, this one may not feel like it's the most relevant, but in many other spaces you can imagine, it is more than necessary. It's no fixing. We each come here with our own stories and our own truths, and it's not our responsibility or charge to fix what we perceive as wrong in another person. The fourth is suspend judgment and assumptions and seek understanding. Some people say that that's not possible, but it's really important that we have that disposition when we're in community with people, because it makes us learners and it forces us to engage more empathetically than judgment. Judgment tends to push out, tends to minimize, mitigate. We don't want that. Speak your truth and respect the truth of others. Everyone's story here, we trust, is an authentic story. And when it's our time to speak, we want the same level of respect. Number 6, maintain confidentiality is really, really important in some community spaces, because in order for people to be honest and authentic with you, they have to believe that you're going to respect the intimacy of what they are sharing. In our youth spaces, we don't use that guidepost. In the youth programming I developed, there are things that have come out of many stories we've had with young people that, frankly, as someone in an education space, in a protective space, I have to be honest with our young people and say, if there are certain things happening in your life, there are sometimes people who should be held accountable for that. And I am sometimes in the position of having to protect you. And so we are honest with them about that. Number 7 is respect silence. Everyone doesn't have a story. I think in this space, everybody's got a story though. So, but in other places, you want to respect the fact that sometimes people just aren't comfortable sharing. And so we often say we don't have a share or die rule. So that is a valuable one for us. When things get difficult, turn to wonder. This is my favorite one, number 8, because I spoke a second ago about engaging our empathetic senses. When people say, do, or project things that are deeply troubling to us, it is very easy to judge those things and to engage our kind of fight reflexes. But for the sake of being in community and building community, we think it's more important to initially try to understand and appreciate that position, what that person is saying. And one of the best ways to do that is to just kind of quiz yourself. I wonder why that makes sense to him. But to turn to wonder is the idea. If nothing else, it allows you to stay in the space a little bit longer when you otherwise would have thrown your hands up and disengaged. And the final one is to trust the circle. As I talked about the circle in the beginning, we believe that in a circle, you have, in a community especially, you have everything you need to survive and thrive in a mutually beneficial way. What you may not have in the circle, it's best that the whole of the circle works together to bring that resource in, because we all have resources and connections outside, but we want to bring them in for the whole of the circle. And so we just say trust the circle because it helps us produce a narrative for all of us, not just for ourselves, but for our children and our children's children. And hopefully that circle, our communities, become more equitable. So thank you very much, Vanessa. If you all would, just as we do this and you think about using this as a tool, center the spaces on those. Here's the story circle that I'd like us to engage with. This is the prompt. I'd like us to share the story of a time when we did not feel like we belonged, or we were made to feel like we didn't belong. And so it's the story. Of course, stories have beginnings, middles, and ends. Vanessa made me promise that I would keep us to a relatively short time. Vanessa, you can give me a time check. I'm going to model it. So if you want to remind me of how much time, we're good at about a minute and a half. All right, so stories, some of our story prompts take people back to really early childhood years. A powerful prompt for us is tell the story of the first time you noticed race was a thing. And it's a story, right? But for this one, this is the story of a time I didn't feel like I belonged, or I was made to feel I didn't belong. So I'll tell you, I'm 14. My mother has married my stepfather. He decides to move our family, well, they decide to move our family to Detroit. And we moved to a little community, what's known as downriver from Detroit. And of course, I know no one. I'm a Mississippi boy. I literally spent a lot of my childhood barefoot in the middle of the Mississippi Delta. So Detroit is a whole new world for me. And I'm at a very impressionable age. So I am at the end of our driveway bouncing a basketball. And a group of boys, almost as far as I could see, the end of the street, were yelling and motioning for me. I guess they could see I was a handsome fella, and they assumed I had a basketball I could play, and they were playing basketball. So they motioned for me to come down, and I, like, what do I have to lose? I walked down. Nobody like greets me. But one of the guys motioned for my basketball. I bounced it to him, and he walked over to me. And this is a joke. I hope it's not. It is insensitive. I hope it doesn't trigger anyone. But I want to be honest because it's an honest story. He asked me how many, and he uses an epithet of a group of people that I don't know. I'm from Mississippi. As far as I know, we don't have those people in Mississippi. But he asked me how many of those people does it take to change a light bulb? And I get this rush of adrenaline because I don't know these people. If I answer wrong, I'm going to be embarrassed. And in my mind, I really can't imagine a right answer because it's a really wrong question. So I said to him, I don't know, man. And he said, well, it takes 1 to hold the light bulb and 25 to turn the house. And the other guys just exploded in laughter. I've not been in this neighborhood. I've not been in this county or this state for a week. I'm sensitive to everything that reminds me of who I am and where I come from. And I'm really, really deathly afraid that I'm going to do something early that I can't fix. And this is my new neighborhood. Like, my mother said, hey, there are a lot of boys in the neighborhood. you'll probably end up making lots of friends. From that moment in that neighborhood, I did not feel like I belonged. I constantly questioned everything about myself, not just from in terms of what I thought, but what I did, how I showed up at school every day. I always wondered, and honestly, I've been in spaces in the last couple of years where I wonder if I was one of those people who was turning the house or holding the light bulb. But that's my story of a time when I did not feel like I belonged. Um, I'd like to invite one of my fellow panelists to share that story if they don't mind.
Okay. This is Arthur. I guess I'll go next. And in thinking about what Vaughn has challenged us with as far as story, first, Vaughn, let me just say that I'm just amazed by the work that you're doing. And I've done some work in Jackson with American Heart Association. Actually, I guess it brings me to this story. Because I was looking at it, it's like I have a few of them. I've been around a little while. But working for American Heart Association, and this was about 2000 and I guess 2008. I'm doing fundraising. So I'm a vice president for fundraising regional. And to give you the flavor of American Heart Association, it's a nonprofit. Of course, most people have heard of it. But it's a large nonprofit that's national, international ties. So it's like a corporation. Also, there aren't many people of color that work in American Heart Association at any position. And even less that would be in positions of authority, such as a vice president. And I didn't work my way kind of up the ranks. I was hired and coming in at that position. So from my experience in growing up, and again, I grew up in Washington, D.C., but I also grew up during the Civil Rights era. I witnessed the riots after the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King in 1968 firsthand. And also in attending George Washington University, I was part of, I'll call it an experiment. After these riots, there were lots of these experiments going on, particularly in majority institutions. If you could get in, and the intent was to bring more people of color into an environment that was majority white. And so at the American Heart Association and in Jackson, we were looking at, of course, fundraising, and we're looking at an event. And Vaughn, I don't know if I get this correct, but there's let me say how it'll come to me in relation to the location. It was a country club. It was a country club. I believe, I don't know if it was in Jackson proper or right outside of Jackson. But here was our event. It was a fundraising event. And again, probably I could count the number of people of color and mostly Black people that were probably on one hand that were there. And so, I pull up. It's a formal affair. And I pull up. I have my tuxedo on. And so as I drive up, and the people that are, I guess, the greeters of, as you pull your car in, kind of asked me, well, oh, you can't park here. And I said, why can't I park here? Everybody else is parking here. And so there was this mistake, I guess, that I was here to work the event, not to be a guest of the event or to be part of the host organization of the event. And, you know, it brought back memories and ideas of history of, you know, well, one, being in Mississippi, but also just the whole idea of how you're viewed and how you're looked at by those that you couldn't be here to participate and be part of this. You must be part of the service capacity on that rate. And so once I, you know, cleared that up, got in, there was still this feeling of, you know, it didn't feel good, you know, and then you wonder about this country club, and obviously that this, you know, was a very segregated and probably still was somewhat segregated facility that didn't welcome all people and how decisions were made. So this story, you know, builds in and understanding the importance, as I saw it, of keeping in mind who you are, and that history has a lot to do with the present and possibly the future as we look at how we deal with our society and how we deal with our issues. So that's my story on that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I won't invite you to the country club again. I am familiar with it. I'm not a member, but I'm familiar with it. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Johnson.
Great.
Thank you.
It's Arthur.
Mr. Arthur. All right. Thank you. All right. Heidi? Uh-oh.
So there we are. Better?
Story's better when we can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, it usually works that way. Yeah, I appreciate your story. I've been with friends that I've seen that mistake be made. I thought about this a lot, you know, being a white woman and growing up in Florida, not so much the experience of Mississippi or such as you've described, but several years ago, I was in my home parish in Daytona Beach, and it was Holy Thursday, so we were all, you know, showing up for the Holy Thursday services, which included, you know, communion and preparation for Lent. But you know, I was sitting with several of my friends, and I was kind of watching the goings on up in the front, and they brought the 12 chairs out and the towels and the basins, and I looked up, and it dawned on me, and this was really the first year that I had seen this in my church, and I looked up there, and as Father Tim likes to say, my eyes probably popped out like two organ stops, because it was all men. It was 12 men, and I was so focused on that, and I grabbed my friend. I said, Dee, look at this, what are you talking about? I said, there's no women up there, there's no one representing any of the women. And before that, we'd had, you know, a different leader, and it was, you know, representative. And she said, yeah, the new bishop said, you know, only men were getting their feet washed, their feet, as the children say. And it was one of those moments where I thought, what am I doing here? And I was so distressed, I got up and just walked out, and some of the men, the ushers that I'd known, you know, for years and years and years, they just kind of threw up their hands. And it was just the most awful feeling to be in your own church and think, you people actually don't think that any of us are worthy of having our feet washed. And you know, which leads to a whole different discussion of the gospel. But it was really that moment when it really hits you, like, I am not one of these people. I am not thought of as one of these people.
Thank you. Thank you very much for sharing that. Professor Burnett.
Yeah. Yeah. This belonging question is so tough for me, and I'm gonna go at it just a little bit. But so my moment when I realized I didn't belong was I was I just finished up my last semester of grad school. I mean, with the dissertation, and it's done, and my class reunion at Xavier University in New Orleans, one of the only historically Black Catholic college in the Northern Hemisphere. We were having our 10-year reunion. And I was so excited to get down. And I was living in Nashville at the time. And I'm in Wiggins. And an unmarked SUV pulls. I pass him. I see he's on the side of the road, past the vehicles. What I thought was just a plain vehicle. Didn't notice. Usually I notice unmarked cars, but this time I, was excited to get to my friends. And I passed the vehicle and I'm just going down Highway 49, as many of you know. He pulls right on my bumper. And I mean, as if he was going to hit my car. He hits his brakes. I continue to go the speed limit. And then he passes me on my left. After that, I pass a marked vehicle. Their lights come on. So immediately, I just pulled over. I didn't wait to be asked because I grew up in South Mississippi and I knew what was about to happen. So at that point, I didn't belong to my family. I didn't belong to my institution. I didn't belong to a people. I didn't even belong to the state of Mississippi, which I still had my license. I belonged to those officers. The first thing they did was the guy leaned in the door and said, "Do you know who I am?" And I said, "No, officer, I haven't had the pleasure of meeting you before." He said, "I'm a narc, and you got out-of-state plates, and I need to know why you're in my city." And he said, "A lot of people are scared of the cops, and you look scared. I'm here to find out why you're scared." So I said, "Okay." And then the next thing I know, he goes to the car, comes back, asks me to get out of the car. When I get out of the car, he tells me to go and sit on the hood of his car with the other officer. They hand me a blank sheet of paper that is a consent form for an investigation and a search of my vehicle. It's blank. They tell me to sign it. I said, with all fear in my voice, I don't know what I'm signing my name to. Now, this is the fall of 2015, after the litany of murders in 2014, police murders in 2014. Particularly think about Laquan McDonald. And I just remember thinking, am I going to get out of this? Am I going to be able to go back to the spaces where I quote unquote belong? And the tension between thinking you belong to a society and how their desire, right, is what I belong to in that moment. It's just a radical example for me of how complex belonging is and how precarious it is.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you all. So Vanessa, when we work and all, it's just easy to address you, Vanessa. When we work, there is not an area of change, specifically racial justice or even economic justice, that the stories shared here don't inform. The biases, racism is systemic. It like people who experience racism don't just experience it in one area of their lives. And so there are lots of conversations to have about policy and even strategy within institutions, or even what it seems most Americans are most familiar with, the interpersonal elements. You call me this, you treat me that. You know, it's one thing for well, there are levels to it. But the most fundamental level, I think, that makes change sustainable is the individual level where transformation happens. If you want to understand racial oppression, hear the stories of people who have been racially oppressed. And it makes it makes the whole book section in Barnes and Noble or that whole category in Amazon, it brings it to life. And so we believe that the importance of story and dialogue is just that. It makes the words jump off the page. We all can remember those feelings of not belonging or questioning our belonging. We have the power to both create a feeling of belonging or to snatch it away. And we do it every single day, many times of day. Well, you know, not as much now, right? Because we're not interacting with a whole lot of folks. But we have the power in every sphere of our lives to create belonging or to destroy it. And sometimes the ways we choose to destroy it is by subscribing to racist beliefs or oppressive beliefs, period, whether they are, you know, misogynistic or paternalistic. It's important. Our work becomes real when we can get people in community to do that, to think that way about the relationships that they have and how they interact with others. So that is my part. I'm sure my fellow panelists may have some thoughts about how their work is made real, but I'm going to turn that part back over to you, Vanessa. Thank you all so much for participating. Thank you.
Thank you so much there. Now we're going to transition over to Q&A. So the way that I'm going to ask that we do this is if you all could just raise your hand, I'll call on you. But I'm actually going to take the first question, and our speakers have all been prepped for this. One of the questions I see all the time in Global Outreach, which is a program through the Center for Community Engaged Learning, for those of you who do not know, and we work with a number of these folks on Global Outreach. How can we, so the Fordham community, live your organization's mission wherever we are? A number of our students aren't back in the Bronx or in our Lincoln Center community. So how do we live your mission wherever we are? In whatever order you feel comfortable answering that.
I guess I'll go first since I was first. I think for us, we look at a couple of things. Community education and civic engagement is understanding how that fits into whatever environment that you're in. The respect of all people, and the understanding that we do have underserved people in underserved communities, particularly communities of Black and Brown, and in those neighborhoods, which sometimes can be close to where people may live, or they may even live in that community. And then is the other thing is to recognize that social justice in our natural environment is so important. And it's all laced around a quality of life, both one that is positive, one that is designed to bring about understanding, respect, and change for the better.
Okay. So I think I follow Mr. Arthur, thank you. Right, Vanessa? Yep.
Yep.
Okay. So my first thought when I heard this question was the Fordham and Ignatius Loyola, go set the world on fire. And I think part of it is you start to think globally and not so much how you can act locally, how you can create the beloved kingdom wherever you are at that place or at that moment, classroom, subway, Rose Hill campus, Lincoln campus. And I think for me, just the experience of camp and then even being a classroom teacher, you're creating that common good through experiences that you and the others can have together. And my last thought on that is one of my first summers at camp, and an elderly Black grandmother was bringing her son through, and she leaned over and put her arm on me and she said, honey, you just remember, you may be the only Bible some of these folks ever read. And it took me a while, to process it, but I have carried that with me, and I try to tell students that it's, you're the face of the beloved community. So that's helpful for me to take with me when I'm traveling and going.
Rufus?
Don't know what to, oh, there it is. Oh, I'm sorry. I lost my screen for a second. Yeah, I would just like to say keep coming to these go events that Vanessa is hosting. First of all, and I will also add that I think that there are some organizations that, in addition to these illustrious ones we have here today, that are all thinking through how we think about the land, right? And how space, Vaughn was talking so much about space. And space is such a central part of all of the work that our partners are doing. For me, that has a theological element to it, because I think that we want to envision how we find God in the earth, how we find God in the work of our hands with the earth as well. And so I'm just going to put a couple of organizations in the chat that some are in Mississippi and one is in New York here that are doing this work. There is one, it's Cooperation Jackson. This one, SoFi Farms, is near New York. Some of you may have heard of this one. And then the other one is Cooperation Jackson, not in West Jackson, but the regular Cooperation Jackson here. And these are some organizations that I would just say one way you can continue your search amid COVID is just to do your research. Learn about these organizations, see how they came about, look at how they're rethinking the political economy that we all have to share in this space. Yeah, so I'll put it here too.
Yvonne, do you want to answer?
Yeah, I'm just going to say, wherever you go, connect with people. I shout out to the professor for Cooperation Jackson. Like they are one of those organizations that their power comes from their proximity to the people they're trying to serve. And I think that's the same way, hopefully for you all. I mean, you don't get to Fordham if you don't have some some incredible potential. So just please connect with the people as well as the structure of the organization.
Thanks, Vaughn. All right, now we will turn over to Q&A. So if you could raise your hand, that would be great. If you don't know how to raise your hand, if you could throw a question in the chat, that would be good too, but let's aim for raising your hand. Nina.
Hi, thank you. First of all, this has been just extremely fascinating and wonderful to connect with people virtually this time. I guess I'm wondering at what ages you sort of had this awakening that this was the work that you should be doing, and sort of how that came about for you.
I'll start with an answer. I'm not sure what age. I guess as I look back and just kind of my history, when I start to put the pieces together and reminisce back, I start to see a pattern which I didn't see as I was going through it, and even in today, realizing how the importance of trust and respect. I guess I always felt like I had that part of respect. I am Catholic. I went to Catholic elementary school and Catholic high school, and I've stayed with my faith all of my life. Sometimes in and out, but hopefully more in than out. But the whole just idea of respect for people and being honest with myself, which when I start looking at the importance of that, it's kind of like your thread of who you are and how you kind of live your life of understanding all people and the equity of the importance of all people in your life and what you do. And then also there are times in your life when you realize that you have to kind of draw the line in the sand, where you have to decide, is it the right thing to do, or is it the popular thing to do? And that's when it gets to be really tough sometimes, particularly when you're younger, but also it can be in the workforce as well, particularly in corporations. So I guess it's been threaded throughout me, and now as I've gotten a little bit more seasoned, I begin to realize that I guess this was my calling of who I am, and that I can't go back now.
Yeah. For me, it was in college, primarily. I went at Xavier. I met a priest there who was by the name of Father Philip J. Linden, and in his course, we read Gustavo Gutierrez's A Theology of Liberation. And having come from a Black Baptist church background, I had some inkling, and King would come up in service every now. Martin Luther King would come up in service every now and then, and in Black History Month, we talk about some things. But the congregation I was from was fairly conservative politically, and in that class we also watched the Oscar Romero film. Being in New Orleans and going to community bookstore and having the owner of that store put Franz Fanon, Wretched of the Earth, in my hand and said, "You need to read this." She didn't know me. She didn't, she just put the book in my hand and said, "You need to read this." And just those experiences primarily in New Orleans in college, where New Orleans just is a place where everything is right up on each other, and that for me was just very formative. You walking into poetry nights in the Warehouse District and speaking with old Black Panthers. It was just a very rich time in New Orleans in the early 2000s, prior to Katrina. But that's where it happened for me in the college classroom, I would definitely say.
Thank you, Rufus. Heidi or Vaughn, you want to answer that briefly?
Yeah, sure. I will tell you. So I've been a Baptist deacon, so um, I remember reading in my teenage years Dr. Martin Luther King's speech, "Drum Major for Justice," and I read it, and I remember telling one of my teachers how impressed I was with it, and he gave me a book with a copy of Malcolm X's "The Ballad of the Bullet" speech in it, and he told me, he said, in your life as a black man, you're going to probably always feel like you are somewhere between these two. He said, if you ever, and it didn't make sense to me at the time, but what happened, I guess I was 30. Well, I was 18. I was on the founding board of our organization in college. I knew that I had a passion for this type of work, but I also kind of been raised to believe that if you didn't know how to earn a living, you would starve doing this kind of work. And so that choice between the rat race and really work that I drew value from, I went out and I got in the rat race for a while, hence my bio, and then it came back to me. And I'll tell you, when I was convinced it was time to do it, a pastor was preaching once, and he said, let me simplify calling for you, or at least learning of calling. He said, see where the Lord is working and join in. And he was telling you, you don't know where the Lord's working if you don't know what the Lord's work is. So I'm constantly like, wait a minute, is that really the Lord's work? Because some people call it that. But anyway, it was that combination of things. I felt like I'd gained some wisdom along the way, but then I had that moment where I felt like the work that I was doing, or I had the opportunity to do, was the Lord's work, and I had developed the skill set to join in. And it's been, listen, I've got 3 kids, and they haven't missed a meal doing it. And my wife reminds me all the time, where the Lord gives you vision, He gives you provision. So I'm Gucci right now. I'll call you, Nina, if that changes.
Mhm.
Heidi, do you want to answer that one?
I would just say, also when I was in college, I read a wonderful book. It was called Christie by Catherine Marshall. Her husband was one of the chaplains for the Senate for a long time. And it was one of those that you just kind of got in your head. So my friend and I decided that we would sign up and volunteer. We were going to go work in a mission somewhere over the summer. And we said we'd take the first phone call we got. And I was Presbyterian at the time, so we went through a Presbyterian group. And she got the phone call that said, come and work on this reservation in New Mexico, the Navajo reservation. Well, she's out there still. And I got the one from Glen Mary that said, come and work in Appalachia and live with these 2 sisters. And that truly made me see life in a different way, a different spiritual path and a different work path. So I changed my major to elementary education to teach, and then kind of stayed with the Glen Mary ties. And then when I retired and got a call that said, gee, now that you're retired, and got to watch out for those kind of calls. But yes, so it kind of opened the path. And I retired a few years ago, and I'm able to spend more time up here now with working with the camp and with Catholic Charities.
Okay.
Sometimes I think the path finds you.
Totally. And I think we say in Global Outreach, the Go Project finds you. I think the path finds you too. We have time for one more question, and I see Rob, your hand is up. Do you want to ask your question?
Yes, thank you, Vanessa. My question is for Heidi, and I just want to thank all the panelists for your insights. So, Ms. Heidi, you've transformed so many kids in Mississippi for years, but you've also transformed so many of our Fordham students down there too. So my question is this: if you were to go back in time to your 19-year-old college self, what advice would you give yourself regarding the theme of social justice?
That's a really good question. My hair would be brown, but yeah, Rob, you know, looking back, I would say don't step back from it. Learn as much as you can. Find ways that you can be involved with what your skills and talents are. And sometimes you have to choose paths that other people might not think are the ones you should, but you do have to just follow that spirit inside you that's leading you to do what you feel you need to do, or what I felt I needed to do.
I'm actually going to echo Rob in the chat. Can everybody answer Rob's question? It's a good one.
Sure. You know, I think when I learned that we're on this earth not for the riches we gain or the titles that we have, but we're here for something else. And that this is where my faith comes in, the fact to realize that trying to figure out that calling, what are we here for? When I recognize that, then that has always stuck with me. Why am I here? Why am I put in this situation, this environment? I've lived in several cities, but and then I've moved on, but they've been significant because there was a reason why I needed to be there and why I was put in that position. I think once you understand that we're here for something that's beyond our control, then you realize, you make a difference.
I would just say that I would tell my young self that justice and social justice has to be clarified from as many possible perspectives as possible, and from the most vulnerable perspectives as possible, and that it is a moving target, that the representative political process that we just went through in this country is not always a way to establish the kind of commons that's necessary for us to actually have a basis so that justice actually means something for the most vulnerable amongst us. And I think my young self still thought that certain processes on their own could have particularly representative political processes on their own could do a lot of work. But when you look at things like the Dakota Access Pipeline and those kinds of things, we can't even name a thing the same way, right? What is the water? What is the land? What does our political economy allow us to know and be close to understanding with the Lakota peoples and so forth? So these are big questions that I fear oftentimes the normative conversation around social justice oftentimes struggles to get to.
Ooh, what an amazing question. I'll tell you, I think what I want to share is going to take about a minute and a half, but I will tell you the thing I wish I had been told, I wish I had known, that I've learned, is that all should really mean all. When we want rights for one and to deny others, that is simply looking for a type of privilege. So that was one of the most important lessons I learned about social justice, that it's something that should be good for everybody, right? And there's a powerful thing about organizing and engaging. There's a poem, I'm going to put it in. It's called The Low Road by Marge Piercy. And I won't read all of it because I've just shared it to you, but I want to read like the last half of it. So she starts out, one of the first things she says is termites can bring down a mansion. Thinking about organizing. And then she goes, two people can keep each other sane, give support, conviction, love, massage, hope, sex. Three people are a delegation, a sail, a wedge. With four, you can play games and start a collective. With six, you can rent a whole house, have pie for dinner with no seconds, and make your own music. 13 can make a circle. 100 fill a hall. 1,000 can have solidarity and your own newspaper. 10,000 community neighbors. 100,000 a network of communities. 1,000,000 our own world. It goes one at a time. It starts when you care to act. It starts when you do it again after they say no. It starts when you say we and know who you mean. And each day you mean one more. Like that to me is what social justice is about. It is about building a movement to where nobody actually gets left outside of the justice. So thank you, Rob, for that question.
I just want to, on behalf of the Center for Community Engaged Learning, thank you all for attending. Thank our panelists for this incredibly moving, relevant, and timely conversation, and the practical ways that we could kind of take what you all are doing and integrate that into our lives wherever we are. Two quick housekeeping items. The Global Outreach Spring application, which I threw in the chat, is live for the undergrad students. If you're interested in that, please consider. We have some really cool opportunities. And next Wednesday at 8 p.m., same time, same place, we're having another Go Virtual with our partners from El Salvador and some folks from the Jesuit First Studies team here at Fordham to talk a little bit about the history of the Jesuit martyrs from San Salvador and to talk about practical implications for us here as students living out the Jesuit mission for education. So we'd love to see you there. But thank you so much for joining us. And thanks again to our panelists. This was incredible. And I'm super grateful for all of the work that you do, all of the partnership that you've offered Fordham over the years, and all of the work we hopefully do soon and very soon when we're able to get teams of folks out to you all. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
A lot.
Good night. Bye, Vanessa. Bye, Mr. Rob. Mr.
Bye. Thank you all for your contributions.
Rufus, I got to catch up with you soon.
Absolutely.
I barely survived the weekend.